I'm a little bit suspicious of conscious motives inside the art practice. I think we all know what it's like to be in that kind of proper flow state when you're really working at your best. Or maybe it's easy to think about, whatever it is that helps you get the flow state together. Whether you're playing basketball or you're drawing or you're writing or whatever that you're working on. And you kind of know, right, that when you're in your flow state and everything's lining up, there's a kind of effortlessness to what you're doing, like that's the kind of affective experience. But really, like objectively, it's you just performing at your best. You know that you're not a better basketball player if you keep stopping every 5 seconds and go, what should I do next? What is the strategy here? Like you're continuously building ideas consciously. Like you need to build the ideas and then run them, run the program in the moment itself, which is why I'm kind of suspicious of conscious motives, because I think, well, as long as I'm establishing conscious motives while I'm doing the work, I'm not doing the work, I'm building motives. And so it becomes like the idea that maybe the motives are part of the work, and it becomes a kind of quite a cerebral kind of thing. Where the Surrealist project, and you can see that I'm a contemporary Surrealist and I'm continuing the Surrealist tradition. And within the Surrealist tradition we could say that there's three major branches, theoretical branches, the political, the psychological, and the philosophical. Political, ontological, philosophical, and psychological. And I'm not doing the political thing. My political statement is I'm not aligned with traditional Surrealism. But then again, who really could believe what the Surrealists believed in 1910, 1920? A lot of things changed since then. But there are still a lot of commonalities, philosophically and psychologically. So I'm going to develop the philosophical and the psychological project of that. And it's a psychological project of that that builds my critique of conscious motives in art, which therefore becomes conscious motivations in art. It's like political art, sloganeering, propaganda, it's all art made with a consciously decided program, and I'm just kind of suspicious of those things. Not because there's anything necessarily wrong with whatever message is being advocated for, or even no matter how interesting that message is advocated for, but I just think that's when people aren't performing at their best. And I like to think about art, in that it's the maximum intellectual density that you can get into an object. It's about the maximum level of sophistication, like the most intelligent objects that we are capable of creating, perhaps as individuals. Which I think necessarily involves dealing with the fact that when we really see what's going on in life, it's not the case that there's something happening. It's that there's lots of people who have very different ideas about what's happening. What is happening is this kind of layered, sometimes in accordance and sometimes contradictory things occurring simultaneously. The world is full of active living paradoxes, and we can usually manage paradoxes as long as you're not a nominalist, so you don't think that the world is constructed from some kind of language, or the world is a form of language and we're using that language. Rather than the world is far more complicated than your language that we've got, and we try to translate it into a language which is a simpler thing, right? Which is again why I don't think you should have conscious motivations. You should have motivations oriented around words, because words are terribly much more simple than what the world is capable of being, right? And it's like a good basketball move, right? You do a fake. Because you know that your actions have symbolic consequences, and therefore they don't have to have those symbolic consequences. You can break you can rupture all of these things. And it's not philosophically or technically interesting to see someone fake in a game. It's like, okay, that's one of the things they do. That's like, you're not any good if you don't do that, it's just part of it. And so we need to make sure that our art and if we're going to have language for art that is able to deal with the fact that we're dealing with these continuous paradoxes, which insofar as I'm continuing the Surrealist project, the figurative Surrealist project, my work is theoretically enormously similar to the work of Chirico and Magritte and Dalí. And it was before I really knew what their philosophies were. There's a kind of continuous project, because we have a similar sense of the philosophical and the psychological mission of art, so to speak, what it means to try to communicate mystery, really, to use René Magritte's term. So Magritte kind of specifically differentiated between mysteries de jure and mysteries de facto. Like mysteries de jure could be like just some curious thing we think is cute we want to know about, or some mystery that is just something you don't understand, and eventually you will understand it and it won't be a mystery anymore. It's many of those mysteries. And then there's mysteries de facto, which, to quote Magritte, it's like, that is the mystery without which the world would not exist. Like it's the mystery which I would call ontological. It's not exactly the way the Surrealists talk about ontology too much. Like Andre Breton said, realism was an attitude, not a philosophy, but it was an attitude towards life. Because Breton belonged to that tradition which we now could more easily call kind of Linney and Harman's work a bit here. The anti-realist philosophy, an anti-realist ontology. They were quite explicit about that, and there's been a generation of philosophers, generations of philosophers since then, continuing this anti-realist tradition. Magritte and Dalí and myself don't agree with anti-realism. I think it's actually not right about, at least it's not the best way to talk about how people experience the world. I don't know whether you can really say ontologies are right or wrong, so much as they're questions of belief. So I think it's important to in this sense, even to take the, this is, I know there's a lot of philosophers who won't want me to say this, and some psychologists I've spoke to said that's probably not right. But I suspect that there's a relationship between psychological orientation and ontological preferences. That you eventually come to have some view about the independent existence of the real world. So I think I'm probably being a little bit confusing by talking about Breton being an anti-realist and Dalí and Magritte being an infra-realist. But it matches in with the word surrealism quite nicely. Like surrealism, it's sur, the prefix, and you work sur le pont, you walk over a bridge or on top of a bridge. That's what sur means, surrealism. Sounds like it's on top of realism. Now I think, again, these things they didn't ever say explicitly, but you get the impression from Breton that what he meant by surrealism was like better than realism, or like the next part after you grow a bit more from realism, you get to surrealism. But we could think of, instead of surrealist art, being something like there's realism, and art is something that sits on top of realism. It's just certainly the way I think that's an easy way to conceptualize what the surrealist project is. And we can get to that through a more colloquial language if we try to use go back to Kant, because Immanuel Kant, the Prussian philosopher of 250. Pardon? Oh, it was outside. So Immanuel Kant, that philosopher from a few centuries ago, is still, I think, most of the way contemporary people think is a development of Kant's ontologies. And he has the noumena and the phenomena, most fundamentally. And the noumena is the actual world out there, the Ding ein sich in German, which is like the thing in itself, meaning the thing, the object out in the world, independent from your experience of it. And then that's the noumena, the thing in itself. And then there is the phenomena, which is your experience of the object. And I think most people understand that that's what the world is, in that it's possible to mis-see the world. And we're relatively familiar with optical illusions and all sorts of like sleight of hand magic. We know that there's a difference between our senses and the world that we're sensing. And that's so fundamental to most people, it's hard to imagine that anybody wouldn't think like that. But that's not, as far as I understand, what most indigenous ontologies are. It's not what the Buddhist philosophy tells you about the ontology of the world. It's not even what some Christian groups would say about the ontology of the world. They would say the world is something other than that. It's not a fundamental separation between you and the world. You're probably much more enmeshed in it, more inseparable from it. So it's like that question, like a fish lives in the ocean its whole life, are the fish and the water separate? That's the mereological question that comes out of the ontology. So a lot of this work is also that the mereological problem. Are the fish and the sea separate? And it's like the answer, right, is like there's no answer to that. Like the question doesn't work because obviously they're inseparable. Because just try taking a fish anywhere else, almost immediately it won't be a fish anymore. And give it a week, it totally won't be a fish anymore. All you have to do is take it out of that situation. So it's like, if I pull all the parts of your body apart, are you still a person? It's like, well, it's trouble, right? But at the same time, to say that the fish and the water are together and they can't be separated, or they're not separate, is just nonsense. Like, just pick it up, look at the fish, there's the water, it's like it's over. And that's the fundamental paradoxical problem in the ontology, is that you know that they must be separable and that they're not separable at the same time. Which means maybe the whole question of separation is not appropriate to what we're doing. So this worked out rather well. So, Kant has the noumen and the phenomena. The phenomena, which is that stuff inside of you, your perception of this world, and the noumen, which is the thing out there. And Kant would say that the reason that we have trouble making this, distinguishing these things, is because the world is subject to cause and effect, and it exists in space and time. And I am subject to cause and effect, and I am in space-time. So in that sense, we have something so fundamentally in common with each other, we are inseparable in that way. But also maybe that we're susceptible to presuming things are subject to causation because we are, and we're subject to, we're biased towards thinking that things exist in space and time because we feel like we exist in space and time. And maybe it's just a bias of perception, the fact that we see causation, even the fact that we see objects in the world. So Kant starts out with this beginning, the noumena and the phenomena. And then you start to kind of unpack, like, because of cause and effect and because of space and time, maybe they're not different from each other. Maybe there is no separation between noumena and phenomena. That's the beginning of the Kantian anti-realist project that Andre Breton, the Surrealists, took for granted. We are enmeshed in these things and we can't really make separations except for practical purposes or through Schopenhauer and Nietzsche and Foucault, with the aim of getting power and growing and being strong, and like we force these illusions upon the world because it makes us stronger. That's not entirely different to thinking through the Plato and Aristotle problem. Are there really gods? Well, it helps me enormously to think there are. So yes, right? And maybe there are, maybe there aren't, but still, like, fundamentally, that's what's going to motivate me towards that solution. So, okay, the realist, the visually realist tradition of figurative surrealism is explicitly about the depiction of phenomena, not of noumena. So like Daniel Henri Kahnweiler, who was an art dealer, friend of Picasso did some portraits of him. He wrote a book on the rise of Cubism. He described Cubism, that strange breaking apart of objects, so we've become accustomed to say, though not with good reason, that's not what they thought they were doing. Kahnweiler said that what Picasso and Braque were aiming for was to reveal the noumena behind the phenomena. That's what they were aiming to do. It's a metaphysical, ontological project. It's somehow arranging phenomena so that the noumena had a chance to peek through. That's what they were aiming at doing. And that's what Dalí and the Surrealists thought that's what Cubism was about. Not all its, it's figurative references, it's stylistic connections to things, it's just illusory connections to that, making sure something legitimate about the object appears. Contrary-wise, the Surrealists say, look, what Breton would say, this idea of a noumena, it's probably just a phenomena. One of the phenomena in life is this idea called noumena. It's all phenomena. Now we, in a contemporary sense, instead of noumena and phenomena, we're more likely to say subject and object. Or the actual objects out there, the objective world, and our subjective experience of the world. It's not 100% matched with Kant, but it's very close in terms of what we get colloquially for understanding of objective and subjective. So the Surrealist project is about making phenomena, which is the Surrealist project is about the subjective experience. And so one of the reasons that we have in the figurative Surrealist tradition a strange combination, though in fact the combination is not relevant, the fact that we have in figurative Surrealism apparently real objects is because that's one of the qualities of phenomena. Phenomena says to us there is something outside phenomena. That's one of the qualities of phenomena. And so you could think about that in terms of the language of the dream. It's always one of the things people most readily associate with surrealism, though it's a very short-lived project and a very an insufficiently deep project. I mean, Dalí even said by 1939 people were making jokes about dream paintings, like it was such a stupid thing to do. And like, you know, nothing is more boring than hearing another person tell me their dream because they think it's art, you know. And so we have that problem in the depiction of dreams, is that you know that some of your dreams just look like real things, you know, and if you painted your dream, people would say, like, is that a photograph? Like a not very well painted photograph, you know, and you go, yeah, that's because it's a dream, and like, there's no way to know. So what the Surrealists were trying to do, and it's one of the things that I move back and forth between, like I've always thought that all of my work was always Surrealist, and there's a large bit in the middle that people think is not Surrealist anymore. It's like I'm just moving the surreal aspect out of immediate visual appearance. And so it's like, how obvious am I going to make it to you that this is a subjective experience rather than an objective experience, even though the subjective experience is full of apparently objective things. Long sentence, do you get that? So we have therefore the existence of the dream signifier. And that is a thing we can, you know, if you just think about Dalí's work or Magritte's work, you know what the dream signifiers are. Like if there's a huge hole in the middle of a person, or the body is half made of sky, that's the part that's not real. Like it declares itself quite loud to you. Or there's a watch, but it's soft. That's the thing, that's the dreamy part. You don't go, landscape is also dream. Maybe you don't, but Breton did. That's why he was okay with those paintings, even though Dalí was doing a realist ontology, meaning the noumena is separate and independent from us. Or we might really call it, which is what Roger Rothman, an American scholar, most brilliantly described, is that it really seems to be that Dalí and Magritte were infrarealists, meaning that they maintain that separation. There was the world, there was the perception of it, and then there is you, the perceiver. It's kind of like a three-part thing. And all three of those should be present in any expression of what surreal art is. It's about showing the layers to things. So we have the idea of the dream signifier, this strange object, and you could probably look at some of these and guess which parts make you think, well, that's definitely not the world as it is. And I might think that other parts are the parts that aren't the world the way it is. That's one of the standard surrealist jokes. You make people think that something is something, but you probably know that it's not. Like the example that's on the Chirico there, the Sydney surrealist. Giorgio de Chirico kept painting artichokes through the late 1910s. And he wrote to Paul Eluard, one of the great surrealist poets, and said, you know, they're actually made of iron. But I love seeing people get hungry when they look at my artichokes, because I know they're not artichokes. It's like having that secret meaning, like I know where this came from, I'm going to make you engage with an abstract version of the thing. You're going to make a private joke for yourself. And that just I think it adds literary content, it adds anecdotal content. The surrealists are very fond of adding anecdotal content, meaning very often a stream of distracting information. Because one of the surreal things that you do is you say, look, you know, this is a regular grass, but imagine there's a pineapple on top, and on top of that there's a little baby elephant, and on top of that there's another two pineapples, and that's joined together by a rose, and there's some ants crawling over the rose, and there's a couple of gloves up there. Let's take the object and stack some stuff on top of it, and it becomes more interesting, or we can see that we've moved from perhaps an noumenal object up to a phenomenal object. So I have these obvious little dream signifiers, you know, it's a giveaway, they're the easy ones. But more particularly, rather than trying to do dream signifiers, I'm trying to work through this exhibition from here over to the three main works here, the two diptychs and the large central work, focusing more on the psychological consequences of these ontological differences. So one of the things I've found really interesting studying contemporary psychology, it's just related to, you know, Salvador Dali's interest in the work of Jacques Lacan, and you know, Dalí repeatedly quoted Jacques Lacan's doctoral thesis because he read it prior to it being published. It's about the way the unconscious and the conscious work together. And really it's kind of a statement about the fact that the unconscious does even more work than the surrealists thought that it did. The unconscious has a much larger effect on what we perceive in the world than even Freud really acknowledged. And so these are the writer and scholar Daniel Kahneman, who died a week or so ago, I think it was during the exhibition. He wrote a theory of object files in perception, which I think are really closely related to Zenon Filson's idea of the thing and the finst. And so these, I think, this is the story that I tell. Remember, I've already said that this is full of paradoxes, so this is one interpretation and there are others. I think of these as being things, meaning objects in the process of acquiring qualities, objects actively in the process of acquiring qualities, and therefore of discarding qualities. So objects are continuously changing qualities. So what Kant and Pylyshyn said about the way visual perception works is that you first make a scan of the visual field using all of your visual neurons, you scan the visual field, and then within that you start locating objects, right? So you walk into a room for the first time, or you're in the darkness and the TV goes on, like you pay attention to your vision, you'll see that the first thing that you do is you map the room, and then you find objects, and if there's anything interesting, or there's anything moving, or there's anything flashing, or there's anything, whatever, you'll attend to it for maybe a quarter of a second, and you'll keep bouncing your eyes around until you're satisfied that you know what the important objects are, and then you'll start looking at them, and then you'll start having thoughts about what to do. So while you walk in a room, you turn on the light, you stand there for a second, and you can do things. Like that's what happens in that, standing there for half a second. So, within the visual map, we have these things like neurophysiologically called finst, figurative instantiation. So whenever it sees something moving in the visual field, it places a finst on that change and adds qualities to that so-called object. Just maybe look at it and go, that isn't an object, that's nothing, or that's just moving leaves of a tree, and you'll drop the finst and the object will disappear. And sometimes you're looking at this tree, looking at a particular branch, you look away, look back, and you can't see that branch anymore. You really let go of that thing. So, as soon as you start appending properties to them, what Kant and Pylyshyn and Daniel Kahneman said that was so interesting, which is about how much information can be appended to the finst prior to it being presented to conscious awareness. How complex objects can be before you know that you know that they're there. Because all that appending of qualities to the finst happens for quite a while in the background before it's delivered to you to pay attention to. And when I say delivered to you to pay attention to, my suspicion here, and this is what Pylyshyn suspected as well, is that that's what occurs in the lower brainstem prior to it being moved to the thalamus and being sent to the neocortex. So that becomes effectively a question to translate that into Freud's language about just how much vision is unconscious. And the answer is more than we might have previously thought, but also it is slightly trainable. But then that would seem to imply that we're throwing it back to the neocortex for quick processing and back again. That's the discussion. I'm being overly technical in neurophysiology, but so what I'm trying to work out, this is it's such a nonsense way of talking. I don't try to work out anything, I just do things. Like a proper surrealist, and then afterwards I interpret them, and I think that's that thing that I've been thinking about. It might not be, but at the moment that's what it seems to me, and I've decided to give speeches about this painting as if that's what it is. I wonder how it'll change by the end of the year. I'll have a whole different story. Come back next year, give a completely contrary interpretation. So I'm trying to find a way to depict, what I'm doing here is depicting things that the visual objects that you're trying to lay memories onto. Memories in Henri Bergson's sense, like matter and memory, a book that Surrealists would have known. Because what I like about this is it's clearly, what I'm trying to make clear is that we have a visual field. The visual field is relatively coherent, and it's totally spatially believable, and you can just spend time admiring the landscape, and then you realize at certain places that maybe it's not the size that you thought it was. Maybe I'm contributing more to the perception of this landscape than I first think when I glance at it. And perhaps I have some kind of superordinate metaphysical objective running in the background which does not belong to the visual field. but it's there injecting a kind of transformative, energetic interpretation. So it would be like in Dalí's Surrealist ontology, the desiring perceiver. And then we look at them and I kind of think, well, they're kind of, they're surfboards or they're feathers. No, they're like, these look like gum leaves, I guess they're leaves. And then I stand back and kind of think about the whole composition. You know, a warm central object who seems to not have a completely stable place in three-dimensional space. I can see a fire, like a little campfire in a little beach camp. It gives you that kind of centering feeling, just delivered by the composition. And then we just look at the figure and then think about this and then think about this. It's like maybe they are leaves, or maybe they're burning, or maybe these are leaves. And I think maybe it's some version of that. But then I stand back and I look away and look at the sky and look back at the picture and they don't look like leaves anymore. Maybe that's just me, but I think that's the way that works. We build that interpretive structure around it. So therefore we can see that the things are objects that are in the process of acquiring and discarding qualities. And so rather than a surrealist political message, the philosophical and psychological message that one might see in these images is a reminder about the extent to which we contribute to the perception of the world. And that is an active, dynamic process that we are both involved in intimately, in that anti-realist sense of being completely so immersed in the world that we can't separate ourselves from it. And yet, it's clearly separate from us, clearly independent of us, and continues to exist here for centuries after we've all moved on. And it's something unique and universal simultaneously. So that's what I think ultimately this Surrealist project is about, like communicating something about the ontology and the different ontologies that there are in the world. So we can have perhaps a better understanding of ourselves and others who might think of the world quite differently to that. So they're contributing more or less to the production of the world that they have, and that they're participating in the formation of objects in the world. That's it, I'm a very nerdy person, is that I read philosophy to relax. I like reading difficult things because I find it soothing, it helps me make sense of the world. In part because I sometimes just fundamentally struggle. I have struggled in the past with some of these fundamental issues about separability and the noumen and the phenomenon, how separate are we from the world, what you're supposed to do with your ego. So of course that, like, it's part of my way of viewing the world. You know, like you hear me just talk about these things because it's part of the way I structure my thinking about the world. But it's definitely not the case that I do that in my artwork specifically. Like it is in that sense that might be criticized very strongly by Kant and Pylyshyn or Stephen Hall. It's optical retinal art. It's purely visual. Everything is always purely visual. My surrealist guardrails. You know what Breton said in the first manifesto of surrealism was that surrealism is pure psychic automatism in the absence of any control exercised by reason or aesthetics or ethics or the long list of adjectives there, I can't remember them all. But it's like pure psychic automatism in the absence of all forms of control, including whatever. So for me to go around thinking I want to make an artwork that executes this idea or represents this idea is to be functional and illustrative in the work, and I'm not functionalist and I'm not illustrative, no interest in either of those things. It's too simple and it's not working. I don't think it's how anyone works at their best. It's about using every piece of mental energy that I have on controlling the colours and placement. That's it, just colours and placement. That's all that I do is move colours around. And so my visual working process, like there's layers to this process, like the long-standing artistic practice, which I've had since I was like 7, is that I make images, I put them in a pile, and I make images, I put them in a pile, and after all the pile is so big it's a problem. You know, it's a mess or whatever, and I go through it and I throw out the ones that I like the least and I keep the ones that are my favourites. Sometimes it meant keeping 2 and throwing away 100, sometimes it meant throwing away 2 and keeping 995. Whatever that editing process was, just throw out the ones I didn't like anymore. And here I am, 50, and I make these, and some of them survive the journey and some of them don't. And those that survive the journey the longest, I like to share with people, because people have been, commenting when they come around and visit and see that there's something really going on there. In terms of the day-to-day practice, it's I have what I told Safi at the beginning. It's like I need kind of a pair of examples. Maybe this I should probably do. Like you can imagine, like I'm thinking, what happens like when I'm looking at the painting. Like I said to you, it's a phenomenal painting. So I'm trying to map my phenomena. I'm not trying to map to the noumena, not the outside objective world. I'm not copying photographs, even though parts of them look photographic. Is I look at this painting and I just see in my vision that this black line is a bit longer. It just looks to me like it's longer, and it's not longer. And so I make it in accordance with my vision. And that's the general internal process, is that whenever I don't see the paintings for what they are, I make them into what I see them as being. So some of the time, and for a lot of people, they just look at the painting and you see it as it is, and I see it as it is, and that's when it's finished. So if I see it as it is, it's no longer, it starts to appear to me to be a noumenal object, not a phenomenal object. As long as my vision of the work is different from the appearance of the work, I make it in accordance with the appearance. That's the principle. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. Half the time what happens is, what I'm seeing is that this little piece of the sky is a tiny bit lighter. So we get all the colours out, I mix all the colours, we get it all together, and I spend 25 minutes working towards that particular precise colour. And halfway towards getting to that colour, I go, that would look great over here. And then I do this. And I didn't think that needed anything. I just felt compelled to go over there and brush that colour on there. And sometimes, I'm in a panic, what am I doing? This is, it's one thing to go, look, I want to paint a pinky orange colour on there. It's like pinky orange, like you just kind of, just a completely different colour, it's at the same time, that's when I liked that kind of sports metaphor, in the sense where, you're going down one side of the court and halfway it's like switch. And it's just like if there's an opening there and you haven't thought about it. It's like you see it and you move to it, and that's it, that's the move, right? And that's how I get to surprise myself and kind of enjoy the process. But that's where I feel like that's the authentic surrealist aspect to it. Because it's impossible, this is again one of the paradoxes of the idea of psychic automatism and the way reason that Magritte and Dalí and all the figurative surrealists at one stage or other got kicked out of surrealism by Breton, is that all you have to say is look consciously, as an idea, I want to make a surrealist painting, right? So pure psychic automatism without control, but the control is psychic automatism. I want to control myself to be a surrealist, and that's this self-defeating process, which is related to the Kantian problem of ethics. But that's why I have to run my process like that. I have always spent this time thinking about these philosophical ideas, because that's part of how I help me to understand the world. And like the surrealists, they found much better self-understanding by reading contemporary psychology, which is Freud and Lacan, than the historical figures that preceded them. And I find a greater self-understanding through contemporary psychology than the philosophies and theories that preceded it, even just decades ago. And so of course you're in a sense doing some kind of theoretical work with your life. So the process is purely visual and as automatic and instinctive as I can make it, so that I'm open to being an abstract painter, but this is what comes out of the process. And when I started painting in the 1990s, I was an abstract painter at the beginning, that they looked abstract, and then as I just kept making them, things started appearing. Things are appearing in my paintings. That's intense. And then as I just do it more and more, and basically spend longer and longer, that's the way they head. Because you can see in some places, like clearly it just starts resolving into more and more objectified objects. And in other places it just starts resolving into objects that like refuse to objectify, even though when you know what the object is, like it's still just harder to see it, because like that's what the, to use the indigenous sense if I can, perhaps like that's the dreaming of the process. That's what I see there for some reason, for no reason. An object that's in the process of becoming, but it's not there yet, or permanently not there. Long answer to your short question. That's what I have. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for coming out today.